About 2 miles from Tarry town, there is a quiet little valley. Some say that the place was bewitched during the early days of the settlement. The dominant spirit, however, that haunts this enchanted region and seems to be the commander-in-chief of all the powers of the air is the apparition of a figure on horseback without a head, known by the name of the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. In this village, several years ago, Ichabod Crane instructed the children of the vicinity. He was tall but exceedingly lank, with narrow shoulders, long arms and legs, and his whole frame most loosely hung together. To see him striding along the profile of a hill on a windy day, one might have mistaken him for some scarecrow eloped from a cornfield. When school hours were over, he was, according to country custom in those parts, boarded and lodged at the houses of the farmers, whose children he instructed. He assisted the farmers occasionally in the lighter labors of their farms. In addition, he was the singing master of the neighborhood, instructing the young folks in psalmody. The schoolmaster is generally a man of some importance in the female circle of a village. Our man of letters, therefore, was peculiarly happy in the smiles of all the country damsels. He was, moreover, esteemed by the women as a man of great erudition, for he had read several books, including Cotton Mather's History of New England Witchcraft. Among the musical disciples who assembled one evening in each week to receive his instructions in psalmody was Katrina van Tassel, the daughter and only child of a substantial Dutch farmer. She was a blooming lass of 18. Ichabod Crane had a soft and foolish heart, and it is not to be wondered at that she soon found favor in his eyes. Among his competitors was a burly, roaring, roistering blade of the name of Abraham, or, according to the Dutch abbreviation, Bram Boon van Brunt, the local hero. He was broad-shouldered with short curly black hair. A deadly feud gradually arose between him and Bram had been overheard to boast that he would double the schoolmaster up and lay him on a shelf of his own schoolhouse. All this talk was suddenly interrupted by the appearance of a messenger. He came clattering up to the school door with an invitation to Ichabod to attend a merrymaking or quilting frolic to be held that evening at Mynheer van Tassel's. The gallant Ichabod now spent at least an extra half hour in his toilet, arranging his locks by a bit of broken looking glass that hung up in the schoolhouse. He even borrowed a horse from the farmer, and thus, gallantly mounted, issued forth like a knight-errant in quest of adventures. The animal was a broken-down plough horse that had outlived almost everything but his viciousness. He was gaunt and shagged. His rusty mane and tail were tangled and knotted with burrs. One eye had lost its pupil, but the other had the gleam of a genuine devil in it and aptly bore the name of Gunpowder. Old Baltus van Tassel moved about among his guests with the face dilated with content and good humor. Ichabod prided himself upon his dancing, as the lady of his heart was his partner in the dance, while Bram Bones, sorely smitten with love and jealousy, sat brooding by himself in one corner. It was a very witching time of night that Ichabod rode homewards along the sides of the lofty hills which rise above Tarry town. In the dead hush of midnight, he could even hear the barking of the watchdog from the opposite shore of the Hudson. No signs of life occurred near him. All the stories of ghosts and goblins that he had heard now came crowding upon his recollection. The night grew darker and darker. The stars seemed to sink deeper in the sky. He had never felt so lonely and dismal. He was, moreover, approaching the very place where many of the scenes of the ghost stories had been laid. In the center of the road stood an enormous tulip tree. Suddenly, he heard a groan. His teeth chattered and his knees smote against the saddle. It was but the rubbing of one huge bough upon another as they were swayed about by the breeze. About 200 yards from the tree, a small brook crossed the road, known by the name of Wiley's Swamp. A few rough logs laid side by side served for a bridge over the stream. As he approached the haunted stream, his heart began to thump. He gave his horse half a score of kicks in the ribs and attempted to dash briskly across the bridge. But instead of starting forward, the perverse old animal made a lateral movement. Ichabod jerked the reins on the other side and kicked lustily. It was all in vain. His steed started, it is true, but it was only to plunge to the opposite side of the road into a thicket of brambles. In the dark shadow of the grove, he beheld something huge, misshapen, black and towering. It stirred not, but seemed gathered up in the gloom like some gigantic monster. What was to be done? To turn and fly was now too late, and besides, what chance was there of escaping a ghost or goblin, if such it was, which could ride upon the wings of the wind? Summoning up, therefore, a show of courage, he demanded in stammering accents, "Who are you?" He received no reply. Once more, he kicked the sides of the immovable gunpowder and, shutting his eyes, broke forth into a psalm tune. Just then, the shadowy object of alarm put itself in motion and stood at once in the middle of the road. Ichabod now quickened his steed in hopes of leaving him behind. The stranger, however, quickened his horse to an equal pace. Ichabod pulled up and fell into a walk, thinking to lag behind. The other did the same. His heart began to sink within him. On mounting a rising ground, which brought the figure of his fellow traveler in relief against the sky, Ichabod was horror-struck on perceiving that he was headless. But his horror was still more increased on observing that the head, which should have rested on his shoulders, was carried before him on the pommel of his saddle. His terror rose to desperation. When he had got halfway, his saddle gave way. He seized the horse by the pommel and endeavored to hold it firm. The saddle fell to the earth, and he heard it trampled underfoot by his pursuer. An opening in the trees now cheered him with the hope that the church bridge was at hand. "If I can but reach that bridge," thought Ichabod, "I'm safe." Just then he heard the black steed panting and blowing close behind him. He even fancied that he felt his hot breath. Ichabod cast a look behind to see if his pursuer should vanish, according to rule, in a flash of fire and brimstone. Just then, he saw the goblin rising in his stirrups and in the very act of hurling his head at him. Ichabod endeavored to dodge the horrible missile, but too late. It encountered his cranium with a tremendous crash. He had tumbled headlong into the dust. The next morning, the old horse was found without his saddle, soberly cropping the grass at his master's gate. An inquiry was set on foot, and after diligent investigation in one part of the road leading to the church was found the saddle trampled in the dirt. On the bank of a broad part of the brook was found the hat of the unfortunate Ichabod, and close behind it a shattered pumpkin, but his body was not discovered. An old farmer who had been down to New York several years after brought home the intelligence that Ichabod Crane was still alive, had kept school and studied law at the same time, had been admitted to the bar, turned politician, electioneered, written for the newspapers, and finally had been made a justice of the 10-pound court. Brom Bones, too, was observed to look exceedingly knowing whenever the story of Ichabod was related, and always burst into a hearty laugh at the mention of the pumpkin. His behavior led some to suspect that he knew more about the matter than he chose to tell. The old country wives, however, maintain to this day that Ichabod was spirited away by supernatural means.